Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Sarah Thompson. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Please give listeners a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
I live on the coast of Maine and I am a practicing homeopath. I'm classically trained and I'm also a shamanic coach. So I work with people on the level of physical, mental, emotional pain to achieve deep healing without drugs through homeopathy and then the container of shamanic coaching.
And the reason I wanted to have you on, I have not had a guest on about this, but I think it's important to understand, we've been conditioned to believe since we're a young age, when we're sick or something's wrong, we need to go out there to change it. We need to go to the doctor. We need a new relationship and then we'll be happy. We need a better job, more money. We've just been conditioned to believe it's all out there when that's not the case, right?
Right. Our all of our healing comes from within. And we can go outside of that. We can go outside of ourselves to find a vector for stimulating it, but we contain it. The body is always trying to heal. The whole self is always trying to heal. So it is within and not without.
So let's talk about, if somebody is experiencing a chronic issue or they
Mhm.
have that pain in the body, they're struggling and efforting and they're grinding and they're trying to create change in their life, but stuck in this vicious cycle. Where do we begin?
We begin with recognizing that they've been given an opportunity. And this experience came to me when I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. Um, when I was 33. My kids were 4 and 8 months old, and I was given this terrible diagnosis. And I wanted to try to heal it naturally, but I really didn't have the tools or resources at that time, and I was really struggling with it. And I ended up going into the hospital. And when I went into the hospital, I made the decision that my job was to find my job was to know that this was the best thing that could possibly be happening to me. And so we start there. We start with that piece of information. Whatever this is, it's exactly the right moment for the perfect understanding of what is trying to heal, where the growth wants to happen. And now what is the next question? But with that understanding, we have a superpower.
Okay, so but there you just shared it's a perspective and it's acceptance because I think what happens for most people, and I've definitely experienced it, when we're going through what we think is something we don't want, we create a lot of resistance, which keeps us stuck experiencing more of the same. So, how do you have that mindset shift? I just got fired from this job and this is happening for the good. Or I have this chronic pain. This is actually good because it's going to require me to deal with the root cause, no longer the symptoms.
So the there's the fake it till you make it approach, which is just to decide that and then fill in the blanks around it. But in order to get there in also through the side door, I think it can really help to reverse engineer past times that we've had growth through the experience of pain. And if we can't see that, then that's something that we start to develop an understanding of getting some help to work through. But we've already done it. Some point in our lives, we've already had a moment where something that was painful, we got through it and we found out that we had to go through it in order to get where we are now. And the same thing is true for any kind of discomfort, even if it's something like migraines or Crohn's disease, we're still getting an opportunity. And if we can trust that those patterns continue to apply, we can just kind of muckle onto that and say, okay, I know this is for the good. Now, how do I make it be for the good?
So I feel, and I can only speak from my experience. I know hindsight is 2020. When I'm out of the storm, I can look back and go, "Oh, I realized why all that had to happen, why that person came into my life, why that person left my life, why that thing didn't work out." I can see it in hindsight. But what can we offer individuals when you're in the middle of the storm and it
Sure.
feels like a lot of chaos and you feel out of control? And then you fall into that negative mental space. What can we offer individuals uh, to self-soothe, to, this
Okay.
inquiry? What can we do while we're in the storm so we can overcome it?
Right. So I'm a homeopath. And so one of the things that I do is match that to an energetic remedy that becomes a touchstone, a physical touchstone for leveraging that process of healing. So the first thing we do is to say, there is a way in which the universe is holding you energetically. You can be matched by the energy. The healing energy is available to you to match the energy of the pain you're experiencing. So we identify that touchstone, and then it can be as simple as saying, when I start to go into this space, is there something that I can do to say, okay, I'm anchored, I'm grounded, this is my touchstone. I can get a little bit of perspective now from the pain I'm experiencing. I can breathe, and I can see that this is something that is like a weather system that's moving through and moving around. So, any way that we can move a little bit outside of the experience of being hijacked by those feelings in order to say, oh, right, I am creating a pattern for myself where I can create space. And we just start with the baby steps. The more you do it, as you know, it starts to become intuitive, and you can take that space without having to create a protocol to take that space.
Well, I think you just used the perfect term, and that is hijacked. Before we get hijacked and fall down that rabbit hole in the monkey mind, creating more chaos. And I think this, it's a lot of self-awareness when can become more aware. And then I even ask myself, it's like, there's something that I teach my coaching clients, and I think of when I feel reactive, the term is triggered. When I feel triggered, I'm like, oh, what is this emotion trying to teach me? So if it's frustration, anger, resentment, stress, worry, what is this trying to teach me? But I want to go back to where you started talking about energy. So you have modalities helping with energy. Now, I love Nikola Tesla has an infamous quote. If you want to know the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, vibration. So I would
Yes.
love to hear from you through your lens of being a homeopath. What does energy, frequency, and vibration mean in our body, mental, physical, emotional?
Absolutely. Right. So that wonderful quote is a quote that comes up all the time in homeopathy, and it is because what we are working with when we're working with homeopathic remedies are the frequencies, the healing frequencies of the energetic substances that we're matching to the state of dis and unease. And we have a level at which things are vibrating in the body, and that vibration can get stuck in a space where, for whatever reason, we're not moving out of a pattern. We've gotten as far as we can in that pattern and we're stuck, and we need a nudge to move through to that next level, because as you pointed out at the beginning of this call, we it's inside. And so it's just a question of accessing it. And when we can match the frequency of where something is stuck, we create the harmonic that opens up more space and more healing energy. And it shows up on that level that you're talking about of being able to move through the world with greater ease and understanding. It's like everything gets a little more lined up.
So I think what's coming to mind is let's talk about patterns and even story. If we start paying attention to the stories we tell, for example, even I had a coaching call with a client this morning. He keeps telling this disempowering story.
Yeah.
Let's talk about stories and even our patterns. And when we become aware of what's not working, how can we course correct, tell a new story, and create new patterns?
Sure. So, what I look at is all the levels on which that pattern shows up first. So, that's one thing that I want to identify. When a dynamic exists in a person's state, it's going to show up on the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual plane. And it's more obvious or more subtle on different planes. But once we can look at all of the different places where that shows up, we can start to identify how would a change on the level of this plane manifest as a change on the levels of all of these other planes. So, for instance, when we have any kind of stuck pattern, I like to pick something fairly easy, but needed or beneficial that is a pattern anywhere else in my life, for instance, and just make a commitment to change it. Let's say, so I'm a regular coffee drinker. I have a cup of coffee every morning, but every once in a while, I'll just stop for a month because it's hard, but it's good to do. And just making that commitment to myself and then seeing it through creates a neural pathway in my brain that says, you keep a promise to yourself, you can do something that feels hard, but is clearly doable and totally in your control. And when we can start to find little ways to do that, it gets easier to apply it to the things that feel harder.
So if we get back to the idea of stuck energy or blocked energy and different angles, yoga and even like Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about our chakras, our energy centers. And when energy is, our survival emotions, when that's stuck in, I think it's the first and second centers, that's why a lot of people have reproductive issues, um, digestive issues and different things because we're stuck in survival. Can you explain what that means?
Well, so what it means for me is that what needs to heal is on the level of a very deep dynamic pattern that's probably pre-verbal in the person. Not always, but is probably pre-verbal in the person. And so the approach into that is not only an intellectual exercise. It's never only an intellectual exercise. But when I see uh, symptoms on that level, when I'm seeing constipation, when I'm seeing diarrhea, when I'm seeing PCOS, I'm looking at where where did this dynamic start for this person? And it usually goes all the way back. And so, what we're going to try to match is I'll get an understanding of let's look at the patterns that you grew up with and figure out the way in which everything that you're doing now is a extremely adept adaptation to a situation that you're not in anymore. So it's okay to put it down. We don't have a hard time putting things down when we actually realize we don't need them anymore. But we often don't realize we don't need them anymore. And so we have to look at, I find it can be useful to look at why might I have needed that? And then I can thank it for its service and not continue to use it because it's no longer doing a job for me.
So kind of what I hear is coping mechanisms that worked in the past are not going to get us to where we want to be going forward.
Right. So I think an example to take an example, just one from my practice. If somebody has really fitful and disrupted sleep, and they don't sleep deeply and they wake easily and can't get back to sleep, and we look all the way back in that pattern and find a way in which that level of vigilance was a result of a perception of a lack of safety that might have come from an actual instance or might just have come from the experience they were having of their environment, can look and say, all right, this did serve what your little self thought you needed to do. Now, how do we establish that you're actually safe and your nervous system can let go? And we do that on the level both of actual energy medicine, where we try to get underneath the intellectual process, and also using some practices. So, for instance, we talked before we started recording about Byron Katie. And one of the things I love about the work of Byron Katie, which is available at thework.com, is that she has this very simple framework for going in and recognizing every time we get that hit, whether it's intellectual or physical, we find a single story, any story that's attached to it, that we can put outside of ourselves. You start, the simplest level is to blame somebody else. That person should not do that. And it's usually you can usually find a recent re-trigger somewhere, a recent time that story has been echoed. And you actually work through it until you find the way in which a totally different or completely orthogonal story could be equally true. And that story might not be true at all. And it releases the energy that conviction that, for instance, you're not safe because this thing is going to happen. That conviction no longer holds. You don't believe it anymore.
So I'm curious, your work compared to what I do, and what you're doing is going back and kind of figuring out the first time. Do you talk about it from a space of like your subconscious mind and limiting beliefs?
So it depends. In the homeopathy part of what I'm doing, when I take a case, I am just finding out everything about what's actually happening now. How is this showing up on every level right now? And I'm looking very closely at language, what gets repeated, at analogies, at corollary. Are there ways in which this person's expression is reflective of a certain kind of state? So I'm looking at all of that. I'm just gathering all of that information. And I'm not, at the beginning of taking a case, I will reflect back what I perceive as the dynamic. But I won't say a lot about what to do about it. And the exception to that would be if there's a very clear sense of, for instance, I had a client the other day whose pattern, there was so much language about being trapped, and there was so much language about having control in the case, that even though I'm taking this information and it's a 2-hour intake, I'm sitting down and I'm going to analyze it, I'm going to give them a remedy. I did say at the end of that conversation, I perceive that it would be of benefit to you to look for some way, any way, that you could open up an avenue to some additional freedom in your life. So I'll start with I keep it really simple and one thing at a time. And the more that things come up as the healing process happens, some of them don't require me at all. It turns over. The next time I talk to them, something that I didn't even say anything about has let go. Other times it's more stuck. Then we go there.
So what I'm hearing in all of this and kind of the process you take people through, I think people have to understand that now I'm imagining like an iceberg. So your symptoms are a tip of the iceberg, but it's through the peeling back of the layers, doing the investigation, noticing the patterns, understanding the energy and the frequency behind it all. That is how we can move the energy and dissolve the blocks. Is that true?
Right. So when we can see it,
Yeah.
when we can have the experience of having that dynamic pattern reflected back to us, that's the energetic similar of the state. And so it's a dialogue. It's there's me and there's the other person, but then there's also the vital force. It's like this three-way dialogue because I'm not, my experience, certainly when I'm working with coaches and practitioners, is that what I'm articulating, I'm not always aware of. And then they're able to say back to me, this pattern is showing up. And sometimes just being able to see that all of that was below the surface is enough to start to move it. And sometimes I have to see it a lot of times. It depends on how deep it is. But yes, so there's what we see, and then there's everything that starts to emerge.
Why is it that most people wait until things get so bad? Example, a health scare, a wake-up call, a divorce, a bankruptcy. People wait until like that as a wake up call rather than paying attention to these symptoms and patterns. And if people find themselves in one of two boats, what can you do to offer them to get started in doing this work so they don't have to hit quote rock bottom?
Okay, so to address the first question, I think that we hold on to, I think a lot of the time we're so afraid to let go of the story that's running the engine, and we don't realize it. In fact, we might say we want to let it go, but there's something really scary about that, usually on the level of the fact that that is some kind of adaptive mechanism that is still stuck on the nervous system level. Then the fear of making the change at the level of the deepest healing that would then move us in a better direction before before we end up in the wreck, is it's enough to team up with the inertia to not change. And so we kind of just keep band-aiding things and doing what we're doing. And I mean, when I am sitting down with people and I'm at some point going through this whole checklist of, once I've got, there's a very unstructured part of it, but then I also have a checklist. And I'll ask people about, how is your whatever? How's your digestion? How's your sleep? And the number of times I hear, oh, it's fine, it's normal. And then we dig in and it's neither of those things. It's so common that it tells you how often we're just walking around in this state of ill health, telling ourselves whatever story we need to tell ourselves in order to hold on to the pattern story that feels the most secure. The good news is that if we take those opportunities as soon as we see a recurring symptom, as soon as something comes back, as soon as something needs a patch, as soon as something doesn't feel right, to say, can I just ask myself if there is growth that's trying to occur here? Can I just be open to the possibility? We can get started on planting that seed. One of the questions that I ask people is, take me through, and it doesn't have to be practical, take me through a perfect day in terms of everything sensory that is involved from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep or through the night. construct for me what sounds like perfection to you. And it can be total. It can be wake up in Bali and go to sleep in Alaska. It doesn't matter. And when we identify that, go through it and identify the feelings that arise with it, then we can start to look at, is there a way to move into that feeling in life now? Because the accoutrement don't really matter. What we want is in service of how we want to feel. And if we're way far away from that, just opening the door to that creates the possibility that maybe there's something here that wants to heal because I want to move into a space of being at ease in feeling that way and not feeling like that's something unattainable.
So what you hit, I think the nail on the head there is, and this is what I've understood at a deeper level ongoing, is the desires that we think we want are simply for the feeling that it will provide for us. So a lot of people think they want millions of dollars, but all they really want is to feel free. Right.
Yeah.
And so what I heard from that is if we get clear on what we want and how we want to feel, what can we start doing now and today to be feeling that in every day?
Yeah. Yes. So that is how I feel. And what I think about that in terms of is we're honing that inner compass. So we get this one priority, and we are always tracking to the thing that we want. So we have to make sure that we're clear that we're tracking towards the thing we actually want and not constructing, for instance, I think I want the money and I'm working towards the money, but it isn't the thing that I want. And I'm going to get the money and it's not going to be the thing that I want. So honing that compass, getting that feedback loop. One of the ways I like to do that is to see if I'll say to somebody, try going for a walk and don't have an agenda about where you're going or what you're doing. See if you can feel which way you want to turn when you come to an intersection or a trailhead. See if you can feel what it is you want to eat when you open your fridge. Look at a menu online and see if you can identify what it is that speaks to you. And start to fine tune those little bits of intuition at a really low stakes level, right? Where if we're wrong, it's not a big deal. Oh, I went left and I kind of wish I'd gone right. And to strengthen that muscle, to attune that compass to being able to make the decisions more easily, and understanding how we make decisions. Like in my way of making decisions, I kind of need to sleep on stuff. My immediate response isn't always for a bigger thing the right answer for me. And so I had to learn that about myself by doing these experiments. When I look back on this, how do I feel about that choice? To find out that it was okay for me to take time, which I used to think meant that I was not very smart, that I wasn't keeping up, because I thought that you had to be really fast in your decision making in order to be intelligent. And if I wasn't, then that somehow meant that I wasn't as intelligent. And it turned out that where I was wrong was in not taking care of my process. And if I did that, then I was going to make better decisions.
So even what you just touched on, intuition, our internal compass, I think that could be a podcast on its own. But I think it's important. I love how you shared that, because as an example, when I haven't listened to, and for me, the experience is always, it's very subtle. It is
Yeah.
calm. It might kind of be a nudge. It might be kind of a thought. It's a feeling. And when I ignore it or I don't pay attention to it, boy, have I regretted it.
Yeah.
And it's generally when I'm hurrying and rushing or in that fearful state, trying to figure something out. And our intuition, that guy, it's always there for us. So what you're talking about is how to build that intuitive muscle, how to tune in, because we're always being guided. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And what you just pointed to is a great way of thinking about one way to reverse engineer it is to see where are those times when we get that sort of sand in the gears feeling after the fact. And we can say, okay, can I backtrack to how I got here and find out where it was that I went? I call it the hard way or the easy way because we're exactly where we're supposed to be. So whatever we did had to be what we were supposed to do to get here. But did we take the hard way or the easy way? And can we figure out how in that moment, if we took the hard way, what the feedback was that we could use in order to take the easy way in the future?
I'm going to share a real world example just real quick because this one has been top of mind, and I've kind of like kicked myself in the rear, and you can't. You got to like let go and learn from it and move on. But as an example, a couple months ago, I was in a bind and I needed movers quick, and I'm on the phone with this moving company. And in that moment, on the phone with this guy, I had a pit in my stomach.
Mm.
Something didn't feel right. And I had this thought, this is a scam. And I straight asked him, is this a scam? Like something didn't feel right, but I was in a hurry. I was rushed and I went on, I moved forward anyway. Well, long story short, they take a deposit up front and then you pay the next deposit when they arrive and the final deposit when they deliver your stuff. And guess what? It was a total scam. I was out, over $1,000 for, and whatever. The point is, I was like, I didn't listen to that nudge, that feeling, the thought that this is a scam. I didn't listen. But again, it was just like, okay, remember that feeling,
Yeah.
and you won't have costly experiences. Here's what I want to ask you because like I feel we've barely touched the tip of the iceberg on understanding alternative medicine and holistic healing and like it's all within. What are some of your daily rituals and practices that keep you on this path?
Sure. So there are two things. Sleep is something that comes up a lot in my practice, and it comes up a lot in the world at large. And what I have come to understand about sleep through my readings and mentors and all the things, I'm just a consumer of information and mentorship and coaching. And then I just synthesize it. These aren't my ideas. That sleep is this yin space. And when we don't honor the need for that yin space during our day, at night, if if we have this particular susceptibility, and not everybody does, it demands attention. And so I talk to so many women and men who are awake at night with all this static energy discharging. And even though that looks like the opposite of the yin space, what I perceive in a lot of those situations is that that yin energy, in order to be able to surrender into the yin space of sleep, we have to honor the need for yin energy during the day and not fill it with frantic yang productivity all the time. So I will just make sure that a few times a day I'm creating some kind of opportunity, whether it's a glass of water, whether it's a walk, whether it's just sitting. I have foster kittens right now, so sitting with foster kittens, to not be talking, not be reading, not be thinking, not listening to anything, just trying to be and allow that yin flow its space. I spend a lot of time in a very yang kind of framework professionally, in the professional development side of what I do. My work is very yin, but professional development of learning. I'm a one woman show. And you know how that is. I got to be all the things. I have to be all the creative direction. I have to do the work. I have to be a homeopath. That's my number one thing, is to be the best homeopath I can. But then I'm also all the creative direction. I'm also, I hire professionals, but I'm the last word on my back end. I'm my own marketing manager. I'm all those things. And this is all this yang checklists and productivity and get it done. And I have to make myself not sometimes and say, my process and my pace is just right for me. If I don't take this time for myself, I pay a price for that. And that's my problem. I can't blame that on anybody else. So I've had to learn to do that because I was raised in a very productivity oriented environment and culture and academically. And I was in finance for a while before I did this. So that's the biggest thing for me, is to say, especially women I know who work from home now. So many people work from home. And women I know who work from home, one of the big struggles is they go from managing the morning routine to the desk to managing the evening routine. And there's never a window where it's, or maybe they take a break and work out, but there's never a window where it's just, I'm not trying to do anything right now. And I think it's important to create, even if it's just a little tiny window, some time during the day when you're not trying to do anything. So that's my priority.
Well, and what you're sharing about this yin and yang energy is it's that fine balance of doing and being, that masculine and feminine energy. But again, what you touched on, our environment, our cultural conditioning, we're conditioned to believe and like wear stress as a badge of honor, to hustle and grind 36 hours a day.
Right.
And that's just doesn't work. So I'd love to know from you, what are your daily rituals? Do you have morning, midday, evening practices? What are you doing to stay in this flow state?
Yeah, I just make sure that those things happen. So I get up at the same time every day, which is sometime between 5 and 6. And I take a lot of time for breakfast. I eat a hamburger every morning for breakfast, actually. And if I'm drinking coffee, I have a cup of coffee. I take a little time to sit outside, and I allow 2 hours for that whole thing to play out. And then I usually work for a couple of hours and then go to the gym. I like to break up the day. If I don't go to the gym, then sometime in the afternoon, I'll go for a walk. And then I don't, with the exception of if I have some kind of group call that I need to or want to be a part of, I don't go on my computer once the sun goes down, or this time of year, even after about 7 o'clock. I shut that stuff all off. So I don't have a lot of rituals and routines, but I just try to make sure that I'm honoring the need for space and not just going till I stop all the time.
Here's what I want to ask. We've talked a lot today, and mainly it's like understanding when we have these stuck patterns and stuck energies where we feel blocked, we have physical pain, we're struggling in everything. What do you believe is a key takeaway you want individuals to get, whether it's getting into this work or becoming more self-aware? Where do they begin?
My most important message, because it was my most important lesson, is that when you're experiencing pain, you're being shown a portal to the opportunity to grow into your true purpose. Seize that opportunity. Love it when it shows up. Be excited to experience that discomfort that is going to allow you to zone in and tune into that compass and do that work. There's nothing more rewarding.
And I think even that perspective shift is, I'm reading this book right now, and there was a page yesterday, something about it is an honor to be having this human experience. Like we chose to come here. And that's what I remind myself. Like I came for obstacles and challenges. Like I grow through what you go through. That is what we came for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if the constraints of being in the physical realm weren't the point, we wouldn't come at all. Yeah. Stay out there.
So I think the idea is to, it really is to, well, there's even this podcast, Know Thyself, to really understand you, to to create that space to connect within that these pains and struggles don't have to be, right?
You
So
use them to their greatest advantage,
yeah,
and then they've served their purpose and you can let them go.
right. Here's what I want to ask you to wrap up the interview. What is a quote or motto that you live by?
Quote or motto that I live by. Physician, heal thyself.
What does that mean?
It means I need to look within me for all of the growth and healing that is always asking to occur so that I can be the clearest possible conduit for the healing that's being offered to somebody else. My job is just to be a conduit for that. And so my job in myself is to be always looking at, where do I need to heal? Where do I need to grow?
What is a book you're currently reading or highly recommend on this topic?
Well, there are a couple of books that I find incredible touchstones for the process of staying grounded and coming back to center when we get into pain. And Byron Katie has a book called A Mind at Home with Itself. It's not the introduction to her work, which is called Loving What Is, but I love A Mind at Home with Itself because it is Byron Katie going through the Diamond Sutra. So it's exploring the ways in which we can get free of our painful stories. And it's one that I will read in the middle of the night when I'm stuck perseverating on a painful story.
Final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
Well, I know that of all of the effort I'm always putting into all the things, probably at least 75% of it is really not necessary, but I don't know which 75%. So the thing that I would tell my younger self is trust the process. Don't make yourself frantic, thinking that you have to get wherever you're trying to get on someone else's timeline. So that's bitten me a lot.
And I mean, I think that's a great one, but it's also, again, when you're in it, I think it's hard to trust the process, but understand like you're exactly where you're meant to be. You are on your own timeline. And I think that's even something I remind myself.
Yeah, we can't be reminded of it too often. If it were easy, we wouldn't need to be reminded of it.
Yeah.
Certainly, I will end up spinning in it over and over and over again. And that goes back to the directive to the physician to heal thyself. I can't be of any good to anybody else if I'm not doing my own work. I need to be practicing what I preach. I want to be holding that light in myself, which sometimes involves some white knuckled trust.
Yeah. Sarah, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed being here, Heather.